All right. I'm sitting down with a Remax Hall of Famer today. Thomas Saunders has been in real estate since 2006. Started out as a real estate agent and now has completed over 1,000 transactions. So he knows a thing or two about real estate. We'll dive into going from a real estate agent to become a real estate investor with a sizable portfolio and still serving clients, and how to sell your house in a tough market. Hey, it's V Lee, and you are watching the Real Estate Baller Show. We a growing channel, building organically, and we need your help. Could you hit that subscribe button and share this episode with a friend? It means more to us than you know, and help us share more real estate investing tips and tricks with more people. Thanks and enjoy the episode. I'm sorry for this interruption. I've been asked a lot about passive investment, and I understand that there is nothing passive about being a landlord unless you can find a great property management company. So if you own an Airbnb, a vacation rental, or a short-term rental, and you are looking to free up your time, contact our team at Buzz Vacation Rentals at 281-549-8432, or check out our website at www.buzzvacationrentals.com. Thank you, and back to the Real Estate Baller Show. This episode is brought to you by Jet Lending. For over 20 years, Jet Lending has been helping real estate investors succeed. They offer 100% financing so you can be in at $0 at closing. I can always count on Jet Lending to fund my deals. If you're looking to fund your next deal, contact our friend over at jetlending.com. This episode is brought to you by National Real Estate Insurance Group, a national independent insurance agency specifically for real estate investors. I personally use NREIG for my investment properties. They offer a low monthly payment option to help you to lower your cash out of pocket when buying an investment property. If you're looking for insurance coverage for your flips or your rental, reach out to them. You can click on the link in the show descriptions, or you can reach out to Jules at 816-946-8443. All right, Thomas. So over your career, how many transactions have you completed?
Well, I wasn't prepared for that question, but
I'm sorry, I just threw it right at you.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, 22 years of doing this. I mean, plus or minus 50 to 70 transactions a year. It just depends on what I'm doing. How many houses you buy, how many houses are you selling? So there's a lot of transactions, but I mean, I don't know, over 1,000, maybe 1,200.
So has that volume earned you maybe 5 times Remax Hall of Fame now?
Yeah, they don't give it to you 5 times. They give it to you once, and then you kind of they make up some other reward for you to make. So
you are a Remax agent. In today's market, do you think it matters? Like, I remember years ago when I first started, I think it mattered if you are a Remax, Keller Williams, or just a no-name agent, right? If you hang your license with a no-name broker. Today, do you think it matters? Big name versus boutique broker?
I do think the name matters in some regard, particularly for investors. And the reason why I ended up at Remax really is because of the name. And it wasn't by my choice. It was the group and the team that I was working with at the time. We were very good. We had a professional brand for buying houses. But we didn't want that weep ugly houses in the yard, because who wants to buy the ugly house? We do, but when we were selling it. So we wanted that professional image of, this house may be on a different side of town, or maybe it's on a nice side of town, but we wanted to kind of be equal to all these other real estate companies. And we did start out with a generic real estate company, but we eventually decided to move to a branded company, Remax. And I've stayed there.
Like I said, I started out as a Remax agent. And so how did you get into real estate?
Well, you know, it goes back from when I was a kid, I guess. I always liked to build towns and cities in the sand and all that. So that's going way back. But I grew up in Houston, and my mother was a single parent. I lived all over Houston. I've lived off of Gessner. I've lived on South Houston by Pasadena. I've lived in Spring, Splendora, Kingwood. I live in Kingwood now. Every year I went to a different elementary school. So as a kid growing up, that home was a very important, foundation. And I valued that as a kid growing up because I didn't have it. So when I went to college, I went to University of Houston. I paid my own way through school, and I graduated with honors. I got 2 degrees in architecture, a minor degree in construction management. And so I loved houses. I loved buildings, and I thought that I wanted to be an architect. And it's kind of a funny story, and you know who I first met in real estate.
I've heard your story. I thought it's really fascinating, so I wanted you to share that.
I worked for a firm in the Galleria, so I did high-end retail. So we did Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Swarovski crystals. Those were all our clients. But in 2003, the commercial real estate was struggling. So the malls and all these things, they just weren't being very productive. People just weren't shopping like they did. So they had to create new types of shopping, like destination shopping. But anyhow, they cut the office in half. We had an office in Houston and one in San Francisco. And the Houston office was cut in half. So I was still a college student. I was an intern, and I got laid off. No big deal. I didn't have financial commitments at the time. But everyone I worked with, they got laid off too. So half the office was gone. I said, wait a second, I can't work this hard and be this dispensable. So as soon as I graduated, I had all this free time. In August, I took 4 weeks to get my license. It was way too easy. Because when you're in college, you're ramped up, you're studying, you're taking tests, you're in gear, ready to go. When I went to real estate school, it was just way too easy. And so I just breezed right through it. I added that to my resume. And then I was interviewing with builders and other architects. And then I saw this yellow billboard on the highway, "We buy ugly houses." I said, okay, maybe I can, use, my construction management degree and manage these rehabs. And I walked into the office, and at the time, there's only 13 offices in Houston. Okay, now it's expanded a lot more now, but I was dropping my resume off everyone I could find. And I walked in, dropped it off, jumped on I-45, headed south to, Loop 610 to go to the next office. I got a call before I got to Loop 610, and they said, "Hey, turn around. We want to interview." And it was Eddie Gant that had called, and so I went for a couple of interviews. And his words were, I remember, "I don't have a job for you, or I don't have a position for you, but I want you a part of this office." And that was in November 2003. And I walked into this office with no position, no real defined job. And he said, "Look, here's 25 houses. We've got some name writers for you with your name and phone number. Get you a call log and log everything down. Follow up, follow up, follow up." And my first year in real estate, I sold more real estate than most agents sell in, a couple of years. And I think I can't remember how many houses the first year. It had to have been around, 30, 40, 50 houses. So it was quite a bit, just my first year, trial and error, learning a lot. And I even got my loan officer's license because at the time, Eddie had a mortgage company as well. He was a partner in a mortgage company. So anyhow, that's how I got into real estate.
Wow, that's a really cool story. I've heard you told it before, and I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah.
Little did you know that you end up sticking through real estate until now, 2025. So when you started off, did you buy any property, or were you just representing buyer and seller as an agent?
Yeah, so as a new agent, you typically work more with buyers. I think that buyers are less educated. Sellers have been kind of through it before, so they're a bit more, they're knowledgeable. So they're more picky. They're more selective. A buyer, you're kind of looking for that agent at the right time, right place. So if you're available, you're going to do business. And so when I started out, my job was to be available. The listing broker wasn't available. I was the buyer's agent, and that's what I primarily worked with, was buyers. And so by gaining, doing so many transactions, you gain a lot of experience. And then eventually those years later, those buyers start becoming sellers. And then you start representing sellers. That's how I see it maturing in the business. So, and that's how it happened for me. And I was identified, I guess, or directed to be the buyer's agent for these investment properties.
So how long did it take you to buy your first investment property?
Well, I had an agreement with the company I worked with that I wasn't going to be competing. So I stayed, and it was fine with me. I was looking, to do what I do and learn and be the best I could be at real estate. So I didn't start investing, I don't think, until I left that office. And that was, I don't know if it was 2009 is probably when I started buying investment real estate. And I didn't do a lot of flipping. I did it when I was working. I worked myself up from selling houses to in about 2007, I was asked to buy all the houses. So technically in 2007 is when I started buying investment properties, but I bought it for the company. And that year, I want to say it was probably around 70 houses that year that I purchased. And
That you bought for the company?
yes, for the company.
When did you start buying for
Then
yourself?
for myself, when I left the company. So, and I think that was around 2009. And
Like, did you want to buy for yourself, or how was it? How did it feel when you first bought your first investment property?
it felt normal. I mean, I'd already done it, so many times, but yeah, I just never did it myself. You always want to invest in your own retirement. So, that's, that was always an idea, but you also want to honor your commitment or your agreements. So if I had an agreement and I was buying houses for a company, I'm not going to be buying houses for myself. I mean, I've got to have it, cleared. So that's kind of why it took, me until about 2009 before buying houses.
What size is your portfolio today? Do you flip them? Do you hold them?
Well, I wish I held more of them, but I bought a few when the market was going down. And then I said, it's a great time to sell. So I sold, a good amount of them. I have about 9 properties right now that I have and that I've kept. And now I kind of wish I would have kept more. And I bought a couple of vacation rentals and I really like that. That's kind of fun. So, I'm looking at really buying the long-term properties to hold. I have a strategy of buying more, but, more in Texas, further away from the coast. I think the insurance is being an issue. It's being very hard to be profitable with the rental properties. It's just real hard to cash flow right now. You can buy them at great discounts, and after you rehab them and then get them rent ready, then your insurance and your taxes are gobbling up a lot of your cash flow.
Well, tell me about it. Like my Galveston houses, one of them, the tax and insurance combined is at least $20,000 a year.
Yeah,
so that's $2,000 extra that you've got to generate from rental.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's really been difficult the last few years, but I'm just looking, and I bought a couple, every year I'll buy a couple, and then I may sell one or two or whatever, but I see an opportunity and I'll just buy it. I don't really advertise. I'm really busy doing what I do. I mean, and I'm really good at liquidating assets. And so I work for a couple of different asset managers and several different real estate investors. And it really keeps me very busy. And I have a very good living doing that business.
Are you still on your own, or what does your team look like today?
I've had an assistant for about 10 years now. And it was really hard to take that step, but I did. And now I just won't do business without an assistant. So I have another agent that I'm training. And I used to have 6 agents, at one point when we needed a big team. But I have plans of, I'm thinking in the future of what I'm going to do and who would be helping me take more time away from the business. And one is the assistant is a huge help because that balances my business and family life. And a lot of people think it's not possible to do, but it is. If you delegate, all these, time consuming things that someone else could do, it is so much worth it. It keeps your mind free. You could focus on doing what you're really good at doing, and then you end up just doing more of it.
You have so much experience and wisdom. And I mean, during COVID, so many new people became licensed in the real estate industry, right?
Right.
But a lot of them, I think a lot of them fail. and can't barely manage to make any money from commission. So what advice would you have for someone like a new real estate agent who's listening to this interview right now?
I would say you need to team up with somebody. I think to make it in this business, you try to do it on your own. I know many people have done it, very, very smart people, very successful, hardworking people, and they just couldn't make it because the business is very much up and down, and you don't get that consistency until you build multiple pillars of business. All my business doesn't come from one person or one, area. I've got, different agreements, referral contracts, and then I've got repeat business. A lot of my business is repeat, and that doesn't happen until you grow into the business where you have people that come back to you. So one, you have to have excellent service, but two, you need to really work with somebody. Don't be afraid to team up with somebody and share your commission. I mean, for the experience and for the connections. And so I have an agent coming on with me, and that's what we're doing is I'm showing him, the ropes. And we're sharing, I'm sharing the commission with him on the deals that we're working on. But if I've got to invest my time, I've got to be compensated because, it's just, this is how it is. So, but do that. You join forces with somebody that is experienced, that may need your help. Because to be honest with you, I can use the help. I'm running around town all the time. I mean, in fact, I handle real estate in Galveston, Beaumont. I got to go to Kyle to pick up a sign because I've just sold one in Kyle, San Antonio, Austin. And so, and actually, I used to not want to do that. And now it's just so natural to do. I enjoy doing it. I don't stay in one area.
You buy and sell property, not only in Houston, but San Antonio,
Yes.
Austin,
Yes.
Dallas?
No, I don't go to Dallas. I never really liked to drive to Dallas.
Okay.
The drive to Austin and San Antonio and in between San Antonio and Austin, that's a great drive. And my future plans is to be, I may never retire, but I want my getaway properties in the hill country. So if I have more business, Central Texas, that's fine with me because, I'll have a place there. And I already have 3 places in the hill country. And so I've got places to stay at if I work out in that area.
Well, you are one of the best. So I think you're a little too young to think of retirement.
Well, you always got to think of the future. You always got to think about the future, right?
I know, but if you ever retire, you have to replace yourself. Is what I'm saying. Okay, so most of our listeners are real estate investor.
Right.
What advice would you give them for the non-licensed real estate investor?
Okay, well, first of all, don't over leverage. You got to be careful with your leverage. I've seen number one investors lose it. And so if you're, be true with your numbers, don't try to force them to work, but you need a good exit strategy. And I would say the same thing, even if it's a new investor, get a good team together. You don't always want to look for that agent that's going to be the discount broker and try to save money on that just so you can make the deal work. Make the deal work. Buy the deal right. Buy it where you have the margins, where you can afford to join forces with the right people. And I will tell you, I mean, there's no issue giving a discount on repeat business. But if you're doing business with an agent or a broker who's just ready to give away the farm, they're not going to negotiate good for you. So you've got to be able to join forces with the right people that are going to help you grow your business, because focus is 98% of success. And if you're the investor, you need to be focused on buying that property, not how you're going to rehab it or not how you're going to get rid of it, to liquidate it. And the most successful folks that I know have someone dedicated on managing the contractors, someone dedicated on managing the liquidations, and then someone's dedicated to buying the real estate.
I like what you just said. If you go with a discounted broker, most likely they will not represent you well in negotiation with the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that.
It is 100% I believe the case. I'm not saying that investors cannot discount or negotiate a fair fee for repeat business, but as the investor gets experienced, then there's a right, time and place for that discussion, but and that relationship. But if you go to a guy and says, "Oh, I'll do this thing for next to nothing," that's not the guy you want.
I think we thinking in the same way in this for investor anyway, because we know as investor, everyone is bottom line oriented, right?
Yeah.
But I say this, that it's the difference between you selling the house and not selling the house is heavily dependent on the agent that you get.
I think the agent brings value to the transaction. If you have an agent that's not work for you, you're going to lose more than 3% potentially. You can lose a lot more. And I think if that agent is not bringing that value to it, then yeah, you got the wrong one. And it's not. And you're right. A lot of investors are bottom line thinkers, but you don't manipulate certain costs to try to make the deal work. And either the deal works or it doesn't.
Okay, let's go over some of the basic of the business of working with investor. I mean, you work a lot with investor. You started out by working with real estate investor.
Right.
How is that different than the retail market? You've done both, but you've done a lot with real estate investor.
Oh yeah, I do both right now. Yeah. So, I think the working in the investment world helps because you do so much more business in and for me in the investment business because there's just so much buying and selling. And then and so you get a lot more problems and you learn how to solve more problems. And then those same problems, a regular retail seller has those same issues. I mean, so there's a lot of similarities with it, but I will tell you the difference with me working with investors is I end up working wherever that deal is. So if I got to work in Rosenberg, that's where the deal was. I'm going to learn about Rosenberg. So I'm in and out of different markets all the time. And so I've learned, I guess my niche is understanding how that market's working. And you can actually take information from other markets and see what they're doing and working and kind of see what this market will do or could do. For example, in Beaumont, it's a different market than Houston. But if you go on the south side of Houston, there's a lot of similarities in the south side of Houston that match with I see in Beaumont. So you can take other markets once you understand what the expectation is and not even have good sales data and be able to successfully navigate through those decisions that you need to make for that investment. So that's the investment side, the difference. The regular retail seller, they're wanting that. I mean, they think they want that expert just for that one neighborhood, like, who sells the most houses in my neighborhood? I want to hire that person. And they're probably a good agent. I'm not going to deny that. But I think there's a huge value in an agent that understands multiple markets. And not to mention, when I was doing this, when I was buying real estate, I had to buy these deals and be profitable. So I had to know what I could sell it for, right? Just as a realtor or a broker.
Yeah.
But as the investor, I had to wear all those hats, when I was buying for HomeVestors. And if I didn't do a good job, I wouldn't be around. So you have millions of someone else's dollars on the line. And if you're not successful with it, you're gone.
I think there's a lot of value in a real estate agent who is also an investor themselves, right?
I think so.
Because you understand the true cost. And I find that occasionally I run into real estate agents who doesn't understand the true cost of something and not advising the client correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time. A lot of folks overlook, like, for example, holding costs. So if you're trying to negotiate a deal and you got to look at your situation. How many showings are you getting? What time of year is it? And what is your holding cost? Because if you're spending, $2,500 a month just to hold this property, and you got a buyer that wants to ask for $3,000 or $4,000 in closing costs, and you don't have a line of buyers waiting for that house, you might want to start thinking, all right, maybe we should take this deal because if we don't, you're going to spend the $2,500 no matter what. So you got to understand the ins and outs of what that investor may be stepping into in the future if they don't work out this deal. So I think knowing the ins and outs of what the investor deals with is going to make you a better negotiator.
Okay, so buyer's market is when the buyer get to put their house on the market and they sell fast, right?
I see that as a seller's market. You put a house on the market, it sells fast. That's a seller's market.
Okay. I misspoke. My apologies. Okay. The seller's market is when you put a house on the market, you sell.
Yes, very fast. Yeah.
Because sellers in control. Buyer's market obviously is the opposite.
Yes.
You know, the buyer get to choose. They have a lot of options, right? Okay.
Right.
So today's market, would you say is the buyer's market or seller's market?
It's a sideways market. It's very sideways.
It's a crazy market.
Crazy market. Every market's going to be different. I mean, I've got deals where I've got no problem selling them, and then you got some areas where you're just not moving. You're not getting any showings at all still. So it's just I'll give you an example. If you're in buying townhouses or condos, okay, and you're in, let's say, the Galleria area or, almost anywhere, townhouses and condos I see right now, they're moving very slowly. They're just, a lot of it has to do with the insurance problems they have, and they're raising those monthly HOA dues, and they're devaluing, making it really hard for buyers to justify to buy them. So you're going to see that more of a buyer's market strongly. But seller's market, you go out to more of the country, like New Caney, Splendora, you buy something like that on maybe a half acre or just a big lot, man, you're gonna sell that thing. And it depends on your price point too. I've noticed this working in Austin and working in Houston. The price point of Austin is so much higher, really. And so that's the bread and butter. But in the investment world, we're buying deals, on the low end of Austin. So if you're on the low end, guess what? You're more affordable. And we're selling them. Everything I've got in Austin is practically gone. I've got nothing else left to sell in Austin. When I get it, it's gone. I go to Houston, and I've got a handful of properties that are just, sluggish, and they're a little bit slower because Houston is just a different market entirely. So it just depends on where you're at, if it's going to be a buyer's or seller's market. I will say what I believe, it was extremely slow last year. It was probably the slowest I've ever seen it in 2024. Fortunately, I was still very, very, very good and I closed a lot of deals, but I noticed it being unusually slow.
So was your volume down last year?
It was down, yes. The volume was down. Yeah. I think I still probably closed about 50 houses. And I was in the year prior to that was probably about 70 or so. So that to me, that was a pretty big drop. Yeah. This year is going to be more than 50 already, I can tell, because it has really picked up in 2025. And so you're seeing it be more of, in that regard, a seller's market, in my opinion. But that's not going to last long. I think it's going to run its course through the spring and part of the summer. Then I think we're going to really feel it like we did last year in the fall. Mm-hmm. And that's just what I really think is going to happen. If interest rates change, that can change the whole thing. I just don't think the interest rates are going to drop enough to make the buyers, move. And that's what I think the market is doing.
Yeah, what's going to save us is if the interest rate drop to 4% again.
Yeah, and not even 4%. I mean, if it gets into the low fives, the market's going to take off. I mean,
that work too.
Yeah, and I think there's some big push on making that happen, but they can push as much as they want. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. It's not going to happen that fast. I think there's other things that have to fall into place, and then you'll see that. But I don't know that we'll ever see rates in the 4s or 3s again in my lifetime.
We might not.
I think it's reasonable to see them in the 5s. I think a 5s is a healthy interest rate, and I think it's a good balance. I think it's good overall for the buyer and the seller.
Well, so here's the thing, right? As an investor, when we buy property, we look at the exit. Today market, it's hard to hold a property because you got the interest rate going against you. I mean, it's higher. Your tax and insurance are also higher. Right. So you can't, it makes it impossible to break even, let alone cash flow.
Absolutely. It is hard for investors. And so the investors that I work with, it depends. I advise them on when to hold them and when to fold them, basically. And for example, last year, we were getting very, very slow showings, just hardly no showings.
Yeah.
And everyone's thinking, I want to drop the price. I had some investors that were in the properties all cash. So their holding cost was a lot lower. So those investors that said, look, if you can hold that property, do not make a price adjustment yet. We've got to get past the presidential elections. We got to get past the holidays. Then we're going to start seeing some pickup, which is exactly what we saw. And I said, now is the time to make the pullback if we do any pullback. And so then we monitor because now we see the activity. But when you're in a marketplace where there's just the activity is just stalled. It doesn't matter how low you drop that price many times. I mean, you're not going to give away the property, but I've seen some investors that say, look, I've got holding costs. I've got to do something. And they drop and they drop. They end up selling for less in this time of year because they didn't sell then, even though they dropped. And I've seen it firsthand. And so there's a time where you have to hold it. So when you know you're buying like at the end of summer and you're going to rehab something for the fall, you got to budget for longer hold times in your negotiation.
So when you advise someone on the holding time, I would typically go into the active, right?
Yeah.
In that subdivision, I'll go to sold in the last 12 months in the subdivision and just kind of look at on the median, the average of how long these properties been on the market to budget for my whole time. Do you do something differently?
I do. I would look at that because you got to look at the data, but you got to also consider that data is past. So that doesn't guarantee the future results of your hold times. It doesn't guarantee your future results of your value. So that's the risk that you take as being an investor.
Yep.
So, but the better you are at reading the market at hand. So not just look at your solds, but look at the actives. What are you competing against? How many active listings are you going to be up against? And then look at the 12-month history and look at in the fall of that time. That's, for example, look and see how many actives were in the fall of last year. You can use that type of information to help predict what type of competition you'll have for the next fall. So you look at things multiple ways, or at least I do, but then you have to gut check yourself. What do you see in the market? I mean, do you see the market appreciating or building? I don't see that right now. I see the market pulling back a little bit. And if the market pulls back at 10, 11%, then guess what? That's not terrible. Especially when the market's gone up 10%, 15%, 10%. Well, we got 40, 50% appreciation just in the last few years in a lot of areas. And so not every area is the same, but if you have to pull back a little bit, it's okay to budget for that in your offer because, you've got to predict where you're going to be at in 6 months from now.
Well, I tell you what, Thomas, this market, like you said, sideways, unpredictable. So when I go and price a property, I go back and forth with a couple of different strategies. Sometimes I price a little bit higher than what I think I sell it for. And sometimes I price it right below market value of where, compared to the active. And today, that's the kind of the strategy I'm using most of the time is to price it right below because I want it to get sold. I don't want to hold it. I don't know what's going to happen the next day,
Well, and you got to think about what market you came from in the last couple of years, though. A lot of investors were able to hotel properties and get practically top market value for them, in 2022. Yep. And then we start to see that, weighing off a little bit in 23. A lot of investors still make that mistake that, let's just try to get it, livable, hotel it and whatever. But what I tell my investors is we have affordability issue, okay, in our market. And I clearly saw this because I saw so many out-of-state buyers come into Austin and Texas and San Antonio, and they were outbidding the buyers everywhere. And the local buyer simply could not afford to compete with the out-of-state buyer. The out-of-state buyers now stopped coming at the same level as they were. We still get them, but right now we're dependent on our local buyers. So what's the problem the local buyer has? Affordability is their number one problem. And so
you nailed it.
I advise my investors to not price it at the top of the market. I definitely advise them to price it just under, but you also have to get that property to where it's livable. Like where I call it minimal condition standard for the lender, because you're going to get majority of your buyers are going to come from the lender or get a lender, right? Borrow money. And that's where you're going to get the buyer's going to pay the most. But you have to make it affordable. So don't do every upgrade. Maybe the buyer can paint the walls. And sometimes you have to struggle with painting the cheapest improvement you can do to a property. So do you do it or do you not? So you got to balance where you're going to get your bang for your dollar, but also balance what a buyer can really do. For example, a roof. I'm telling you, we got major problems right now with insurance companies. And if the buyer's not going to be able to afford the insurance premium, and it really messes with their debt to income ratio, because it will if it's an older house, you're going to lose buyers. So if you have a roof, even though there's maybe nothing wrong with it, but if it's older than 15 years, you might want to budget to replace that, because I guarantee you're going to be negotiating it whenever you're waiting for that buyer to come and they're not there. Now you finally got one, and now they got to have a roof replaced when they really shouldn't. And it's all because the insurance companies don't want to insure it. So you got to be careful on what you're doing. Budget for some of these things, but maybe not do them all, right? Pull back on some of your repairs, but be prepared to do them when it comes time to negotiate.
When needed.
I think you're going to fare out better doing it that way than just doing a full-blown remodel and try to top it out. There'll be a time and place for that. When the market gets into a full-blown buyer's market everywhere, and that won't happen until we have enough inventory. And how we're going to get more inventory? It's going to be foreclosures. Once we have a foreclosure event, we're going to get a high rate of foreclosures. You'll start getting a high level of inventory, and it'll be a buyer's market. That's when you want to rehab to the full extent, because you're going to have so much competition and you want to look the best on the market. Right now is not the time to be looking the best, the prettiest. You want to be the best value. So I agree with your strategy of pricing it just under, but you got to brush off the dust, put a little lipstick on it, and make it workable for the buyer.
Well, I mean, I've made my fair share of mistakes, right? And you and I know I still have a problem child that I haven't got rid of yet, you know? And that came from greed. And so you just live and you adjust.
Right. You live and learn.
Yeah. Let's switch gear to being an investor and also an agent, right? And I think one of the things, if you decide to become also a real estate agent and list your own property, that you better become really knowledgeable about the rules, the track contract, and all of it, and disclosure, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you do decide to go that route, you do need to be very knowledgeable. You need to be very experienced, and you really have to weigh, is it worth it? I mean, like my rentals, I'll list my own rentals, and I take that risk. You know, when I do flip a house here or there, I'll list it myself. I'll take that risk. But if I'm doing a high level of flipping, then you really have a lot of moving parts, and it's harder to focus on some of these really important things. And if you miss something, man, it could cost you a lot of money. I mean, trying to save money in some areas, you got to be very, very careful with that.
And a lot of time, I think one of the big things is also the E&O. Many brokerage don't offer E&O to your own property, to the investor. So if you list and sell your own property.
Depends on what brokerage you're with, but you have a lot less E&O opportunities to get coverage, yes. And it all stems from the lawsuits. They want to avoid lawsuits. They know that investors that are representing themselves, they have a higher chance of the lawsuit. So, there is some insulation that you get from having, I think, a good agent. If you have a bad agent, you're probably going to get lawsuits anyway. But you have to be careful, because this is two parties negotiating, and they both have one common goal, and they have two other goals that are not common, and there could be disputes, and which lead to lawsuits. So you've got to be able to put those fires out and protect your interest.
How do you feel? I say this. I said, for investors who are newly licensed, I would highly suggest to work with a brokerage that provide education. And nothing against like EXP or some other boutique brokerage, but I just feel like sometimes they want to save some money and go with a brokerage that does not provide the necessary education.
Well, there's multiple ways to do it. But if you're getting a license and you want to get good education, if you go with some of the bigger companies, they're going to have programs. Remax has a program, and I don't know. I don't go to them because I just don't have the time to go to these, but they do. They have different things. I hear Keller Williams has an excellent program. So there's a lot of agents that like to go there. They always talk about going there for the education. But I will tell you, no matter what broker you go to, the broker is going to get a piece of the commission. And there are some that maybe appear better than others. There's some brokers that are just transaction fees, right? But if you're closing 70 or 75 deals a year, and you start adding up those $200-$300 or whatever they are, $275 transaction fees, you're paying about the same that you would pay for a name brand, brokerage. And so, you kind of get what you pay for, really. And I don't think there's a real good shortcut. If there was, I'd be considering it. But I don't think there is.
Yeah, I want to correct myself just so I don't get misunderstood and people thinking I'm picking one brokerage over another. What I'm saying is, for the investor to go with a broker who is knowledgeable and willing to fight or help when needed, right? Because, we all know there's so many things that could happen in a contract. From when you go live on the MLS to when you get a contract. And if you don't know what you're doing, you get in trouble.
I totally agree. And I will tell you, when I'm working with agents all the time, and the most inexperienced agents that I generally work with are going to be coming from a lot of these boutique brokerage. And I hate to say that, but that's what my experience has been. They're lower fees. So if you don't close a lot of deals, heck, they're probably a good deal to go to. Yeah. But you're not getting that support or learning, And I think that if you're not going to be closing a lot of deals, it's really I think it's worth it to go to a bigger brokerage. The only exception, I think, to that rule is if you're working with a broker, I don't care if they're generic or who they are, and they're knowledgeable, then you're teaming up with somebody, you're going to learn. But if you're trying to do it on your own and not team up with somebody, then don't team up with a brokerage, a boutique or a no-name broker that's you're not going to learn from, or they don't have some ability or way of learning. You're just going to be spinning your wheels, I think.
Totally agree. Because I run into an agent, I talk from time to time, and when you ask them basic questions like, we signed a contract today, when is the option money due, how many days is the financing, the survey, and they can't give you the day. And I said, well, why do you have to deliver the title commitment on time as a seller? And they can't tell you why you have to. And I'm like, these are the things that are really crucial when you enter a contract. Yeah. And maybe I'm just really compliant.
Well, and that may be the case, but you know what? If you're buying houses at a high level, you really need to be focused on that and trying to. And like I said, in my business, I delegate. An investor needs to delegate as well to be, I think, at a high level, and so that's just what it is. But if you're going to try to be the Renaissance investor and do it all, that may be fine, but you're not going to get to a certain level if that's what you want, if you want to do.
Okay, let's talk about selling houses in this market. Beside pricing, what else is important to get houses sold? Because I hear it a lot. I got my house listed. It's been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, no activities.
Well, we try a lot of things right now. We're not in a full buyer's market, but eventually you're going to start to see, some mentioning of BTSAs, broker to selling agents. We see these things, depending on where your market is. And we've been in such a hot market for a while that the BTSAs have really disappeared. But you start seeing that really from the builders. And a lot of the builders you can learn a lot from. So, for example, the builders understand that we have an affordability challenge with the buyers. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the reasons why our houses aren't moving is because they simply can't afford it. So what are the builders doing? Well, look, see what they're doing. They've forced the buyers to use their mortgage company. So if you go to D.R. Horton, you're going to use D.R. Horton Mortgage or whatever they're called. And what does D.R. Horton Mortgage do right now? They're buying down the rate long-term for the entire mortgage. They'll get it down to about 3.99. I just closed one in Killeen, and that buyer actually could afford maybe a 275, and the insurance were higher on an older house. You get new houses, insurance is lower. The interest rate's lower. The buyer can afford more. The builders know this. So the builders are able to move a lot of that inventory that way. If they didn't have, I always thought, why do builders control or want to control the mortgage companies? I know now. Because in a time like this, when properties don't want to move, they can actually take losses on the mortgage company and then still keep the prices, the appraisal values high enough because they got another 100 houses to build. If they try to drop the price on the houses, it affects them for so many more houses. They lose so much more money. So they'd rather take the losses on the mortgage company side, temporarily, right, until things change.
Right.
And then they keep the prices up. So you see some of that strategy with the builders. Incorporate that into your own business. So we have things called a 3-2-1 buy down, a 2-1 buy down, and that's about probably the best that we're going to be able to do with these.
Can you explain that quickly to the audience, just in case they don't know what that is?
So I'm going to go with the 3-2-1 buy down. So the 3-2-1 buy down. So right now the rates are around 6.5%. You might get low sixes, but let's just use 6.5%.
Okay.
And let's say buyers sell houses every 5 to 7 years, typically, right? Or a homeowner. So if you can do a 3-2-1 buy down, that means the seller is going to contribute to the buyer's closing cost, right? And that contribution is going to go in the form of buying down their points, their interest rate. So the first year, it's bought down 3 years. So instead of getting a 6.5% rate, you're looking at a 3.5% rate. Huge for the first year. So it makes it very affordable for the buyer. And then the next year, it's bought down 2 points. So then it goes to a 4.5, which is still a fantastic rate. And then the third year, it's bought down by 1 point and it's a 5.5, which is not really a bad rate. Really, it's a very healthy rate. And then after that's used up, it returns on the fourth year back to the normal rate, which is 6.5. Well, buyers typically sell, or homeowners sell in 5 to 7 years. So a lot can change. So it's a really good program. The other kicker to this is, let's say rates do change next year or in 2 years. Well, you still, in your buy down, you're in the second year of the buy down. So you're at 4.5% and it's about to expire and go to 5.5%. Well, you're going to refinance because the rates had dropped to 4.5%. Now you can lock it in. Let's say it drops to 5%. You can lock it in at 5%. You didn't use all your buy down. That money is held in an escrow. Now that buyer can use that money to help afford their refinance or reduce their refinance cost. And then they can lock it in at the lower rate. So the 3-2-1 buy down is a fantastic strategy. It doesn't work as good as it should because a lot of people don't understand it. And I think
That's right.
more and more people start to talk about this, it's going to help us advertise more. It's going to help us.
But the 3-2-1 buy down contribution is separate than the seller contribution that you have on the contract, on the track contract.
It's all considered seller contributions to a lender. So a lender is going to look at, and they're going to have limitations on what they'll allow. So it depends if you're doing a conventional loan and it's not a first time home buyer, if it's not an FHA loan, then you may be limited on, to what they'll allow as for those contributions. But
isn't it typically 6%?
if it's an owner occupied property, the maximum typically could be 6%. But depending on your price range, the lender may not need all 6%. I mean, the closing costs may not be all 6%. So the buyer may ask for 6%. They can use some of it towards a buy down. And it doesn't have to be a 3-2-1. It could be any kind of a buy down.
Right.
But it's a good market.
The most popular is the 3-2-1.
Yeah. So that's what you do to get these properties to move. You have to figure out a niche, something to offer that no one else is. We're not to the point yet, but when we get to a major buyer's market, I'll tell you some of the secrets or tricks that I do. I'll put ads in the paper and I'll go super deal, and then because buyers are looking everywhere and you're trying to stand out. So you get super deal, 3-bedroom and 3-2-2 remodeled, because remember, in a buyer's market, you're going to fully remodel your house because you want to stand out. Because all the houses that are just kind of brushed and lipstick on, those are the ones sitting. Right now, you're starting to see the beginnings of that. You're seeing more inventory stack up because the real pretty houses, they're still selling. It's the ones that are just not, they don't have a REBall and whistle, that just aren't fully updated. Then maybe they were updated in 2000. They're nice, but they're not updated in 2025. Those are sitting on the market and they'll sell. They're just taking longer. But as we get more into a heavier buyer's market or approach that direction more, my advice would be, you've got to make your house stand out. So you've got to do some more rehab.
Well, I'm not sure if I look forward to doing more rehab.
It's a balancing act. So if you're not going to do more rehab, then you're obviously going to have to sell for a lower price. But I will tell you, right now, buyers are getting to be aggressive. And like in 2024, 2022, sellers were pretty aggressive. I mean, we were listing them as top market, and we were still selling them 15, 20,000 over, and they wouldn't have raised. So, hey, you got to waive the appraisal. It's pretty aggressive stuff. Right now, the aggressive things that I'm seeing with buyers, they're not afraid to ask for a lower price. They're not afraid to ask for ridiculous concessions. So you got to think about that too, and be prepared for that. In your pricing, be prepared for that in your negotiations, because I'm seeing the buyers come out with a little bit more of confidence that they've got a little bit more of an edge, and they don't have all of it every market. But if things don't change, what means if the interest rates don't change, we're going to eventually grow the inventory to a level. It will be a buyer's market. I don't think we're quite there fully yet.
Okay, switch to something lighthearted, light load here. Professional photos. Do you believe in having professional photo in every listing?
You should have a photo, I think. I don't think you need a photo on your sign. For years, I didn't have photos on my signs. I do.
No. I mean, house pictures. We're talking about selling houses, right?
I'm sorry. Like being realtors or whatever. I think, yes, it depends on the house. If you're selling a house that's a fixer-upper, you don't need professional pictures. Okay? If you're selling a house and you've done a really good effort at rehabbing it, yes, pay the extra money, get the pictures. The clients that use me, I pay for those things. That's just part of my deal. Okay? Now, if it's a fixer-upper, then we're not going to do it. I've got a professional camera. We'll get nice pictures. But if the investors want the extra effort of making that house look nice, absolutely, we're getting professional pictures. It's important because online is where the buyers are going to find that house. You want it to look good.
Okay. So back to trying to sell a house in this market. We talk about pricing strategy. We're talking about getting creative with how to sell. Anything else that you think of that we should know?
Well, I could probably talk all day about it, but keep it simple, really. Is one thing I would say. You don't have to try to reinvent the wheel. Real estate has been selling real estate for many years. We've gone through all the types of market changes. At least I've seen a lot. Maybe if you're new to this, maybe you don't understand what to expect. But I've seen some pretty difficult markets and how to prepare for them and what to expect. So don't over leverage. Some of these things aren't just about how to sell it, but how to make it through. Because if you don't have a good amount of capital for reserves or able to last, then it could pose another problem when you're trying to sell. So that's one thing. But really keep it simple. Buy the properties right. If the market is unsure, then there's more risk. You need to maybe pad that profit margin a little bit more, because I was taught your profit margin does two things. It keeps you in business, and it protects you. So if the market does turn on you, okay, it's turned. That margin needs to be there to protect you as well. And so that's what I would add to that, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say for investor, now is not the time to get aggressive with the buy.
Be careful with your buys. Absolutely.
Yeah, I used to. Obviously, a few years ago, we get aggressive.
Yeah.
Like we can push the envelopes, but right now, don't push the envelopes because you might be out of business. You might not survive this season.
Yeah, and the thing is survive for a good, healthy market, and there's opportunities out there, And I know, look, I know a lot of investors that will buy something and say, well, I know I'm not going to make a lot of money on it, but you can wholesale it or, to another investor and just get a little bit of money and pay for some of your marketing or whatever. And those are good strategies. If it's not a good deal, you don't fully, engage in the deal, but have another exit strategy, let's just say. And there's a lot of that going on.
All right. This has been great. And you're right. We could go on for another day on this stuff. Okay, but let's wrap it up here. So what do you, Thomas, what advice do you have for your 18-year-old?
My advice to my children would be probably very similar to advise just general people. And that is, I've seen worked with a lot of different types of people. And I've had really good times, and I've had really times that were struggles. So we've all been ups and downs through it all. But I think the money is always there. Don't be afraid, because the money's always there. But hold your family dear and close, because they're not always there. There's a time limit where people won't be there. You know, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. So, and then in the bad times, you got your family, you know. So just cherish and balance your business and your family. You know, my kids are all looking for where they are going to go in their careers right now. And you know what? If you want to be a teacher, great, be a teacher, be happy. You know, you don't need all the money in the world. You know, it may be a little bit more uncomfortable lifestyle, but if you're happy, that's fine. Because the money's not always going to bring you the happiness. It complicates things. So value your family over.
Well, let me help you get it uncomplicated, Thomas. I'll give you my bank account number right now.
Be careful with money. It complicates.
No, that's the sound advice. That's very touching. Okay, last question here. How does the audience get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to my full name is Thomas L. Saunders. You go to thomaslsaunders.com. It'll forward you to, you know, some real estate stuff, and you can look at reviews and look at all my past clients. And I can bet most people out there steak dinner that you won't find agents that have much more reviews than I do. I'm very proud of these reviews. I worked very hard to get them, and they just pile up over the years. And then my cell phone, 713-819-9145. I live and die by the phone, and that's one of the biggest complaints in real estate is communication or lack of. And you just don't get that issue with me.
Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I do have a favor to ask. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with more amazing stories and insights from REBallers. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.